Hi, sweet souls. Welcome to I'm Awake, Now What? A podcast about life, love, laughter, and enlightenment. I'm your host, Krista Xiomara. Rack up some good karma by leaving a 5-star rating and write a review if you're enjoying this podcast. And tell your friends about it. This Sunday, I'm joined by Stefano Cefandos, who returns to the podcast to discuss modern-day relationships. Steph brings awareness to the different types of intimacy that can be experienced in a relationship and the importance of not assuming anything. Steph broaches the subject of connecting spiritually in a relationship and how if we stay open and curious in our romantic connections, we will experience a higher level of satisfaction. Stefanos is a relational alchemist, international speaker, and author. Hey, Steph, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I really wanted to have you back on the podcast because you do so much important work. When I had you on last season, we just primarily talked about masculinity and the spiritual experience with masculinity, but you do a lot of work around relationships. So I wanted to have you back to talk about that. But first, update the audience on what you've been doing since last year. And then I know you just got married, so congratulations on that. Yeah. So what's been going on with you for the last year?
Yeah, so a lot has been going on. We're also, at some point mid-next year, we're moving to Austin as well, which is great. Very excited.
To my city?
Yeah, well, it's going to be my city now.
Oh my God, that's so exciting. We're going to be neighbors.
Super excited. Yeah, absolutely. So we're excited about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've been working on creating, and we have been creating some new programs. We've launched. It's called Be the Queen. For all the single ladies out there that are really looking to find love, create love in their lives, create a beautiful harmonious relationships, which it feeds into what we're speaking about today. And that commences, our next journey commences November the 5th, and we're nearly full. We literally have a couple of spots left, and so many. There's been an overwhelming response to that. We've hardly even promoted it. We've hardly put it out there. So we've been creating that program, which will then feed into, that's an 3-month online program, but that's going to feed into some in-person workshops as well.
Yeah.
And we've developed a curriculum for a one-day workshop, and we call that Love Amplified. It's all about love, which is really exciting. And then there's 2 and 3 day immersive experiences with that for couples as well, looking to really deepen their union, their intimacy, their sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, their connection, their co-visioning together. So there's a lot in the pipeline. And then I've got my men's work that I do, which is really exciting, and deepening that journey next year as well with another program. I have Reclaim Your Kingdom, and then there's Be the King, which is that's a deeper dive still. Again, just with a few core men that we go through a very opening, heart-opening, mind-opening, body-opening journey for 3 months. And that includes some in-person deep dive as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So lots going on.
Yeah. Well, so exciting. I'm so excited that you'll be here. And I'll definitely have to meet you guys in person. I haven't met your wife yet, but I know that she does a lot of really good work too. So that's super exciting. Oh my God. I can't wait. My first question for you is in the female perspective. I hear this a lot, and I've said it myself too. As we're mature and we grow and we actually get on a spiritual journey, we're constantly hoping that we'll meet men that have also a spiritual connection, but sometimes guys don't call it that, or maybe they're not using that word. And so I was wondering, is there a bridge between what we want as women in a spiritual connection in a relationship and what men interpret that as? Can you help me bridge those two ideas together?
That's a beautiful question, actually. So it's really different for everyone. It's different for every individual. But if we're talking to a collective mainstream context within our cultural paradigm, there does need to be a bridge. And so it comes from conditioning, ideology, and belief, right? And how we've been essentially raised and brought up. And so part of that, and this isn't the whole story, but to go into the whole story, it's really quite layered and complex. But just let's look at one aspect of it. So let's look at emotional expression. And so traditionally in our society, emotive expression or emoting has been more suppressed in men, and it's been more freely accepted for girls growing up.
Right.
Whereas boys, their emotions have been suppressed, so they've developed this pattern of not expressing their emotions, and it then leaks in other ways. And so it leaks either in ways of self-harming, isolation, excessive aggressiveness, obviously, but that's linked to one's biophysical state, so their biology, their hormonal profiling. For example, if you're a male, you tend to have a greater level of testosterone. We're finding, and research is telling us that our biology does impact our behavior, and our behavior impacts our biology. Right. And so there's a foundation there. So most men will tend to be more aggressive or more distant or more isolating. Part of that is because of their hormonal profiling and biology. Part of it is because of the conditioning, the cultural conditioning and the ideologies that they've developed, the value sets that they've developed, the systemic conditioning in society as well, what media tells us at a very subtle level to be and do and what's appropriate for boys and girls. And we take this ethos and we bring it into our adult lives. And so why I mention the emotional aspect is because then women start to relate to the world and to men and to themselves and to intimate relationship differently. They have an unconscious bias or expectation leaning towards this is how it needs to be in relationship for me to feel safe, for me to give and receive love. These are what my preferences are. And equally, men have that as well. And there's a difference. There seems to be a difference. And so bridging that gap it's not necessarily, hey, men, you need to be more emotional.
Yeah.
No, it's not about that. However, having healthy, clean, emotive expression for any human being is necessary because that helps us heal in real time. It helps us deal with past trauma or pain or fears. And then we don't bring that unconsciously and sometimes consciously into a relationship through being triggered, through having not cleared up our past and then not being able to get a clear sense of who we are in the present and therefore not being able to vision a future for ourselves. And so we become stuck. We feel frustrated. We feel dense in our body. We're not held in a safe way. We're stuck in our position.
Yeah.
And so the frustration has to come out. And so we have all of these unmet, unconscious expectations that we bring to a relationship because we're not examining ourselves. So one of the bridges is self-examination and self-awareness.
Okay.
And you do that by obviously speaking to your thoughts, to your feelings, understanding yourself. You do that by having support, professional and a social support, friends and family. You do that through healthy, regular ritual and practices and routines such as meditation in the morning or maybe breath work, exercise, being mindful of what you eat. And you may be thinking, well, how is mindful nutrition going to help bridge the gap in relationship? It's because it's a step towards, an energy towards self-care. If you practice self-care regularly, that becomes a norm. And so the emotional self, the communication piece, the relationship piece will tend to gravitate towards a practice of self-care because you have a habit of it. So we're essentially creating healthy habits. I hope that answers your question, and it's a starting point for people at least.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is that if you start practicing that self-awareness and that self-care is that you sort of self-regulate in a sense that like the expectations that you want to put on others are actually being met internally as opposed to like getting them from your partner, which we'll talk about that later because I have a question about that as well. And I did want to ask, I'm still learning my language around other genders and how people present in the world. So I just wanted to asterisk that I don't mean this to be like a binary conversation because I know that people are presenting in the world very differently, not just as male or female. So for the listeners out there, this applies to every I just want to I forget sometimes too that I want to be more sensitive to people who don't identify as just male or female.
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I did want to clear that up because I want to make this a safe place for people to explore these topics with themselves wherever they are on the spectrum. The next piece that I wanted to layer on this is okay, so now we understand that there's a bridge that needs to be crossed between us in our relationships. The underlying root of anything is how we grow up in our families and how relationships present to us. And so I wanted to see if you could talk to us about our familial patterns growing up and how we can keep in the forefront of our minds as we're in relationship with other people that sometimes we're subconsciously acting out patterns that we viewed from our parents in their relationships, whether it was dysfunctional or healthy, and how we can find a way to apply our own new patterns that are healthy and I guess allow us to thrive in relationship with all people.
Great question. It starts with willingness. And so we come to a place where we recognize that the old ways are not working for us. We're not fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be an individual choice. We have to see that. Yes, we can have people outside of us, friends and family, practitioners, psychologists, counselors, guides, coaches, mentors, whatever, say, hey, how you're behaving may be affecting you in this way. And that's great because we're relational beings, so having external feedback is really helpful. Ultimately, we have to make the choice and be willing to look at our lives and say, you know what? I've been in and out of relationships for the last 15 years. And the patterns that I'm noticing are just not healthy for me, and they're not really serving me. Where are they coming from? The moment we start to ask questions about our condition, the moment the brain and the mind start to work, and the mind-body start to work in a very cohesive way, searching for that answer. Now, where most people get unstuck and they unravel themselves, and not in a way towards growth and transformation, in a way of actually remaining in their patterns, is that they hit a point where, and this has been very true for me personally, hit a point in your growth where it's too painful to look at the stuff that's holding you back.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. One, because it could be really traumatic, and reliving the past is super painful and super fearful. Second, the ego comes in and says, why are we changing? We're venturing into the unknown. This is unsafe. We need to stay safe. That's what we do. Let's stay safe. And so most people hit that point and say, it's easier just to be how I am. It's easier to go back to working 12 hours a day. It's easier just to watching TV instead of working on myself and journaling and reading and spending time with a counselor, or going to an immersive workshop where I can then liberate myself sexually, or start talking to my physical and emotional and or sexual abuse that I experienced as a child, and start to really feel the feelings around that. Because ultimately the body knows the only way to actually shift from one state to another is to feel the fullness of that state, to experience it in a safe way, then reframe it, then have a different relationship to it, a new set of beliefs. Neurochemically, you're changing your associations with it. Physiologically, you're changing your associations with it. Emotionally, you're rewriting the entire story. And that's a process. And that requires a great deal of initial willingness and then effort. And most people come unstuck because our culture is one as well of short-term gratification.
Yeah.
And it's just really painful. It's really painful to look at that stuff. So unless we have support, it becomes challenging. So my guidance is always find support, whether that's a family friend, whether that's a deeply trusted, respected, revered peer, whether that's a professional help such as a counselor or a shaman or a coach, whatever that may be. Have support, whether it's a support group, whether it's a regular AA meeting, whatever it is. Get yourself surrounded by people that you trust and that can see you with very little judgment or no judgment, and just are here to really serve you and serve your journey. I think that's a tremendous starting point.
Yeah. And having that curiosity, like you said, to just recognize first that maybe you're not satisfied with how you're playing out in relationships, and not having judgment on yourself, but just recognizing that something needs to change in order for you to evolve. I think when you said that at the beginning of the answer, I thought that was really great, because it is hard to look at ourselves, and it is hard to look at the fact that we're all human beings who are collectively growing up, carrying around, generational baggage, and then our own baggage that we pick up, that's heavy to look at sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I really wanted to talk to you about intimacy, because I sat with this question for a really long time. In my own experience, I wanted us to do two things here. I wanted us to be able to define what intimacy is, not just in the sexual sense, but in relationship, because I was adopted when I was 5. So I was adopted into this family that's pretty dysfunctional. My parents are miserable. And they're really, really deeply Catholic, so they refuse to get divorced. So they've lived together in misery for 60 years. It's very sad. I also never saw them be intimate with each other. They never hugged. They never, I don't know if they even had sex. And it's not something we talked about, right? So for me, my challenge has been not modeling that behavior in my own relationships, and also understanding that within their relationship, the way they're presenting to each other, I picked up obviously as a child, very subconsciously, and trying not to emulate behaviors that I think are dysfunctional, right? So I've done a lot of my own work on that. So I just kind of want to know, what is intimacy in a relationship?
Yeah.
What is healthy intimacy? Yeah. I think a lot of people were in relationship and we've never asked this question, and no one's ever defined it for us. And I was wondering if you might take a stab at it.
I'll take more of a stab at it. Firstly, intimacy can be very confronting and daunting and even overwhelming, and that's one of the reasons why we avoid intimacy or closeness or the sharing of ourselves and also seeing others. So it's an open seeing of ourselves, allowing others to fully see us and us also seeing others for who they truly are. And that both of those are overwhelming. The first, allowing others to see us, we open ourselves up to judgment, humiliation, rejection, abandonment, etc.
It's really scary.
Right? That's can be really scary. So we hold back, we hide. Seeing someone else then places massive expectation on us, and essentially, again, if we don't meet that expectation, leads to possible rejection, abandonment, humiliation, pain, distance, isolation, etc. So deep and true intimacy must come from a foundation of self-worth. We fear not being good enough and not being seen fully for the rawness that's in our heart and our soul, and that deters us from being intimate. It really challenges us. Years of conditioning really can take us to a place of low self-worth if that's what the conditioning and the exposure was about. And we lack a belief in who we are, and we then lack a belief in exposing ourselves. So real intimacy is really, it's a meeting between two open beings, or it could be multiple open beings depending on what setting you're in. Open hearts. So authentic intimacy is really defined by our ability to meet each other precisely, where we are at any given moment and share the fullness of ourselves in that moment. It's an open invitation to connect organically with each other without any expectations or prearranged agendas. And so for me, real intimacy doesn't make demands, it doesn't set conditions, it doesn't set expectations, it doesn't coax, it doesn't bribe, it doesn't wear masks, it doesn't hide, it does not present alternative versions of self to fill this perceived void or expectation of what we think others are thinking about us. Authentic presence in intimacy simply asks us in that moment to be precisely as we are, fully revealed, fully connected, fully present. All that is not worthy fades away in that moment, and all that is not worthy or perceived to be not worthy is also welcome. And that really is intimacy where everything, all of you is welcome. It asks us to shed the masks that we use to disguise our fears, our pains, our doubts. It asks us to surrender to whatever is real in the moment by connecting to our own inner power. That means we have to have inner trust. We have to have some level of self-worth. And even if we have low self-worth, believe enough in ourselves to give that to someone else as well. So it helps to be in front of someone that we trust, respect, and revere. But we're also opening our hearts to this person or people, and we're asking them to do the same. It's a reciprocal thing. It sees us all for that we are, and it meets us exactly where our hearts and minds merge. And so for me, true intimacy is not defined by externalized values, by what others wish us to be. Intimacy is revealing, and at its best, revealing for everything that we are. We can fully be ourselves, and we need to put on that facade. We feel liberated. There's a freedom that comes with intimacy. Not so much at the beginning always, though. So it allows us to break down these self-imposed barriers, often influenced by various negative nuances and conditionings of our society. And in intimacy, we're able to transcend the ordinary and become one with our natural and our divine state. Shame leaves us, guilt escapes us, our preoccupation with low self-worth and low self-value, that dissipates, right? And we're just left with this rawness, this nakedness of heart, soul, body, of what we are in the very moment. And when we realize in that moment of openness and rawness that there's only love, we release judgment. We release harsh critique. We are vulnerably exposed in that exposure, and we create a space for meaningful connection and profound sharing with one another. And that, for me, that's we drop the ego. We really drop the ego. We can be seen, felt, and known and heard for all that we are, and we can do the same for the other person. We bond and we merge. There's a merging takes place. There's a sincerity takes place. There's no show that's required. All of it's welcome. The bad, the muck, the horrible, the yuck, the ugly, all of it's welcome. I know that's a long definition of intimacy, but that's my definition of intimacy.
I love it. I have kind of a couple comments, but I think just in summary, for the audience, is to have an open heart, to practice intimacy, like internal intimacy without judgment for yourself, anchor yourself in your own worthiness, and then mirror that intimacy and worthiness out to another so that you can connect together, I think is kind of in summation what you were saying, which I thought was really beautiful. And with the definition that you just described there, I think it's interesting to think about intimacy in those terms because, even doing these podcast interviews with people I've never met before, like having to tell them about my own life story, sometimes I even feel very vulnerable and like exposed and afraid that they're going to judge me. But I think what you said at the top of your explanation about the worthiness is just knowing that however you're presenting that, without a shadow of a doubt that you are worthy and loved and whole, and that it doesn't matter what somebody's reflecting out to you, that you have that really deep within you, right?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. That's a big part of it. It's where that, and that's the intersection of self-worth as well.
Yeah, I really love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining. I hope that helps a lot of people and also we didn't say anything about sexual intimacy, which we'll get to later, but
that's secondary.
I think sometimes
that's one form of intimacy. It's one expression.
Right.
There are at least 11 expressions of intimacy.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of confusion about when people say, like, I want to be intimate with you. I think automatically we go to the physical and we think, like, oh, I need to be physically exposed to this person. But really, intimacy is so much more than that. It's also like trusting somebody with your past and your present and your future and your fears and your joys and all of these things in relationship with them. And that I think it's good for us to just put some context and some structure around that because I'm telling you, nobody's ever defined it for me. I've just been trying to figure it out for the last 39 years of my life. Sweet Soulers, I am over the moon about this new app I just downloaded called Saged. Saged is the go-to app for all things spiritual. For all my moon babes out there, Sage has you covered with moon rituals, divine feminine work, inner healing, crystals, and even sacred sexuality practices. Sage is a community-focused app bringing together like-minded individuals who want to expand their spiritual practices. You get all the information and tools you need to keep your daily practices going and meet some really amazing people at the same time. Sage can be found and downloaded from your iPhone and Android app stores. Download it today. My next question was to build on to where we're going with the relationships is communication, because I think in relationship, communication is just such a big thing to tackle, especially however we grew up, right? Like some of us are conflict averse and some of us are conflict heavy and some of us want to talk everything out and some of us just want to quickly problem solve without getting into the nitty gritty and nuanced personality types and characteristics and communication styles. How can we generally give advice around how to better effectively communicate in a relationship?
Two-step process that comes to mind for me, again, there's so much around communication, obviously.
Yeah.
Communication isn't everything in a relationship, but it plays a pretty important role. And so the first thing I always say is, don't vomit your stuff on your partner.
Yeah.
Just don't do that. So take a step back. If you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling triggered, let me just clarify what triggered means as well, by the way. So when we're triggered, these are buzzwords that we use. Sometimes we just don't know why we're using them, and I make a point to really clear language up. So when we're triggered, where our emotional response is heightened, intensified, and maybe even a little bit too extreme for the present moment that's unraveling. And so the triggering part comes when our unconscious conditioning rears its head and says, hold on a second, this is really similar to a very painful situation that we had 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 25 years ago. Let's actually assemble all of our troops to be really present to this and put that coping strategy in place that we used 25 years ago to make sure that we hit the nail on the head with this and we really don't get affected by it. And so our emotions are amplified. So depending on who you are, you'll either retreat and run away. You'll either be massively avoidant or you'll be aggressive and confrontational, whatever it is, right? And it's almost like, whoa, that's unwarranted. Why are you so upset? And we don't even know why. So when we're triggered, that's what happens. I just wanted to clarify that up. So
okay, thank you.
It's doing the work. Then another buzz term, doing the work is dealing with our past traumas, pains, and fears in a way that is healthy, so that we neutralize those events and that we shift and evolve the relationship to those events. And that's a multi-step, multi-layered process. Anyway, so we're experiencing discomfort in the relationship. We're projecting anger at our partner, or they've legitimately done something that is just not healthy and not in alignment. It's just out of line. or maybe we're just really upset about something. My first recommendation, and this is part of the self-care and self-awareness practice, is go within yourself first. First, your self-reliance, it's your first port of call. Go within you first. You are just you. Just go within you. So sit with it, meditate on it, do some movement around it, whatever breath sound and movement practice around it, journal to it, whatever it is. Sit with it, feel the feelings around it. Let there be a healthy release point. So if it's anger, hit a bag or a boxing bag, or hit some pillows, or let the anger move through you, whatever it may be, right? If it's anger as an example.
Yeah.
Then if you're still stuck with it and you don't have an understanding of it, or you're not even connecting to it fully, and you just have this really uncomfortable feeling in your body, seek some advice outside of the relationship, whether it's a friend, whether it's a counselor that you have access to, whatever it is, and maybe it's a support group. Get some perspective from trusted, respected, revered people, because ultimately your partner is not your counselor. They're not your therapist. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't go to them with issues and you can't express yourself. But how you do that's very important, because you're intimate together, because you're sharing a life together, a romantic life, you're sexual together, you're emotional together, you may have children, finances, all that stuff. It can be a lot of pressure, and there's so many unconscious nuances that feed into your dynamic. And so there needs to be a level of respect and space that's given when you come to your partner with communicating difficulties. So, for example, once you've gone through that process and you have a deeper connection to what you're feeling, you still may be charged, but your charge will be different. And it won't be projected and thrown and vomited on your partner. It will be, hey, darling, I really need to talk to you about something and express some stuff. When are you free?
Yeah.
It's going to take me about 30 minutes. You then give your partner an opportunity to really drop in and be present and give you a time. They don't feel bombarded against. They don't feel threatened. They don't feel restricted or constricted. That respectful gesture is everything. You'll be surprised by the massive difference that makes in healthy communication. They give you a time when, it could be now, it could be later on. If that works for you, you come together and you share. And you just share from a very open, vulnerable place. And you're not massively charged without having any idea of what you're going through. You've gone through the, what the fuck is this? What am I experiencing?
Right, yeah, that
and
reactionary response. Yeah.
Because you've gone through it in a mature way with yourself, and that means you got you. Your inner masculine's got you. You've got you, and that's powerful, and your partner sees that. And then they're going to naturally be more willing to be present to your needs and help you. There's a starting point for some effective communication. I mean, there are other things, like if you're in the middle of an argument, someone's got to call uncle. Just say, well, stop. And you have safe places that you go to. Maybe your partner goes to the study and you go for a 20-minute walk. And you say, right, we're going to reconvene in 40 minutes or 20 minutes or 4 hours or tomorrow. You know, whatever agreements you have. And you make, and you heard that saying, 80% preparation, 20% execution.
Yeah.
You don't figure this shit out in the moment. You have agreements, conscious agreements in place. You figure out what your unconscious agreements are. I'll give you an example of that. And then you go into your conscious agreements and you say, right, if we're arguing, this is what we're doing. This is how we're rolling. This is the way we want to argue. This is the way we want to treat each other and communicate. With your unconscious agreements, you may be with someone and you're having dinner. And you prepare dinner, and you're the type of person that likes to have dinner, all the plate and everything really, really clean from before you sit down and eat dinner, whereas your partner's like, we'll do it later, we'll do it tomorrow morning, it doesn't really matter. And that's the beginning, and that doesn't bother you because you're on a hormonal high, you're in the honeymoon period, whatever. And then after a while, you really get triggered by that. It really upsets you, and it becomes an argument. You never listen to me. I ask you to do the dishes with me or clean up, and you don't want to do it. Why? What's wrong with you? Why are you disrespecting me? It's like, whoa, I've just grown up not having to do the dishes right before dinner. I'd rather just relax and eat. And then if you explore that and you get deep into that, maybe every time your parents would argue would be around the kitchen. And often the kitchen was really dirty or messy. And so you equate this very negative experience with objects in your environment or a setting in your environment, and you've made this connection. And really that's an unconscious agreement that you have that if the kitchen's not clean, our relationship's not going to be good.
Yeah.
And so how true is that in the present moment? And so these are the self-exploration, unconscious agreements that you have to explore within yourself before you bring that to a relationship. 80% preparation, 20% execution. You have to be responsible for your stuff. We all have to be responsible for our stuff. And in relationship, we learn about ourselves. So one of the conscious agreements can be, hey, I want you to call me out on my shit in this way. Don't do it in this way because that triggers me or that upsets me, but do it in this way. Can you do that? Yes, I can. Wonderful. We have an agreement. Let's move on.
Yeah, I like that what you said about recognizing that we all have individual triggers that can pop us into that initial reactionary process. And I think creating a plan of communication so that if you do get triggered, or even if you're not triggered, just to have space to talk about things. I think that that's really, really good advice. And I know I love Esther Perel because she does all those relationship stuff. And she says all the time, we're not built to be each other's everything. And like that,
right.
We have to remove that expectation in relationships, and our partners are not built to deal with our psychological upheavals because they're not trained therapists. It can be very confusing. I'm so glad that you mentioned like all of the other things that are intertwined in a relationship that make it feel as if they're so intertwined in our finances, our emotional support, our housing, our food, our nourishment, everything. So like I think subconsciously, if you're not staying awake, you can think like, well, I depend on them for all of these other things, so they have to support me in all of my psychological bullshit or whatever else is going on with me. And I think it's really good that you said that because I think it is really confusing. If you're not really doing your own work or self-regulating, you can assume that they're going to have to do that as well, but it's not really healthy for your relationship long term. Like you do have to work on your stuff, and you do have to be self-responsible and self-reliant. I think it's really good.
That self-reliant, that self-reliant is big. Yeah.
Yeah, I read a book called The True Truth About Love by this Buddhist monk named Jason Fisher. It was my first book when I got out of my first marriage. And it was a lot about the interdependence of relationships as opposed to codependence. And that was the first time the concept of being self-reliant and self-regulated had ever hit my own like atmosphere. And so it was really I really needed to hear that at that time because it's helped me grow and evolve. One more question I have in relationship to communication, which I think is really key, is how do we ask for what we need, all of us, in all of our relationships?
I think we ask from a place of truth. Again, there's a fear of being rejected or our truth not being reciprocated or not being seen or not being embraced. And that's what stops us. And so we have to, ultimately, how do we ask for what we need in a relationship is do your own inner work. Get yourself to a place of confidence and self-worth that you feel you're worthy enough to ask for what you need. That's really the answer to that.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's really good. Okay, and then so moving on to the next layer that I want to talk about is, so we've talked about the connection, our family patterns, intimacy, how to communicate, asking for what we need. And then what about in those moments where we have to hold space for each other and not actually give anything to each other except for just be with each other? How do we build that, proverbial muscle up in relationship?
You carve out the time for it, whether it's a date night, whether it's, 5 minutes at the end of every evening in togetherness, where you sit in silence or you eye gaze or you just hold each other or you talk about each other's day. Again, it's preparation. It's not an in-the-moment thing. It becomes an in-the-moment thing because it becomes a habit and it becomes something that you become excited about. But couples who share together really grow together as well. And so it's carving out that time, whether it's weekly, daily, every second day, to really just be in each other's presence, to know about each other's lives. How was your day? What did you experience? What did you feel today?
Yeah.
And that's a regular practice that I think individuals need to do for themselves. Be self-reflective. How did I experience my day today? Was I the person I wanted to be? What did I feel today? Was I upset today or sad, or did I experience negative emotions? Why? What did that mean? And how can I be a different person tomorrow, or a more advanced, evolved version of myself? That's important. You've got to set the time in coupledom to really go. or in any open relationships where there's multiple people involved, you've got to make the time and create the space. Doesn't matter what the relationship. It could be a friendship. It could be a mother and son, or an uncle and nephew, whatever it is. Like it's if you want to nurture that relationship, you've got to put effort in, and setting up those times are really important. And I don't mean to be one of those people because I'm definitely not like this, that I'll put it in your calendar. And you may just have to, because that's where your life is at the moment, and come to a level of acceptance around that. And if that's something that you don't want to be for the rest of your life, make moves to change it. But if that's what's required now to prioritize intimacy and connection and sharing, then that's what you do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. My next question is, we kind of touched on it. I don't know how much else we want to say about the difference between codependency in relationships and interdependence, and the difference of one can be potentially unhealthy and one can be more healthy. I don't know how you define, I don't think you and I have ever talked about how you define what a healthy relationship looks like from a dependency standpoint.
Yeah, so for me, codependency is when we're essentially it's external validation. And so we're relying on our well-being or our state of being, relying on others for that continuously. We lack a capacity to cultivate that for ourselves, whether that be through, hey, I'm happy just going to the movies on my own, or whether that be, I can't be happy unless my partner's happy. If my partner's sad, I need to be sad. And there are strong elements of codependency. And of course, there's deep links into historical conditioning and into childhood upbringing and the developmental patterns that we've adopted as children, the attachment styles that we've adopted as children, the way we've learned to give and receive love as children, the way that we've learned to feel safe as children, fundamentally. Whereas interdependence, it carries a greater sovereignty and sense of self. So you have a greater sense of self-worth. You know your value. You know who you are in the world. You don't have confusion and doubt about that. And whilst, of course, the environment outside of you impacts you, that's natural, you're not completely reliant on who you are based on how others see you. And so there is a deeper level of sovereignty and self-worth there, because you know who you are and you trust in yourself. There's trust there. Your attachment style is healthier. The way you give and receive love is more open and healthier and clearer. You tend to feel safe in your body. You're more embodied. You've dealt with any trauma or pain or fears that you have in your life, or you haven't experienced massive amounts of that. You've been really reinforced as a child, and you just know yourself. And there's some differences. And so the latter is far healthier, because you bring that independent self to the relationship, and you're also willing to be part of a relationship. And that's where you know that person or those persons can also help evolve you, and you can help evolve them. And they're more advanced or more evolved ways of relating.
Yeah.
And they're not exclusive to certain people. Well, they are actually, but everyone has the capacity to actually experience that. They're exclusive because people aren't really willing to move through and drudge through the muck to get there.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that are, it becomes exclusive to them. But everyone has that capacity, unless, of course, you have severe brain damage or mental conditions, example, schizophrenia. So I don't want to be naive to think every single human has that capacity. Some just don't.
There are some limitations.
They don't have the physical. They have their own internal limitations. Yeah.
So I did want to talk about sexual intimacy, and I just really wanted you to talk about what that is, how it manifests in relationships, and just some more context around what this could look like in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, it's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah.
It's going to be different for everyone. That's for sure. What's really important is that we really understand that sexuality is something that's very vulnerable and raw for most people.
Yeah.
Even though we live in a society today that isn't as repressed as it was, it's far more liberal than it's ever been. I won't say ever been, because thousands of years ago sexuality was viewed differently in different cultures, but in more modern times it's more liberal than it's ever been, sexuality. And some may say too liberal, in the sense that there's a distortion in sexual expression and how we see ourselves sexually and how we see the world and others sexually. And so what's really important is to understand that it can be sensitive to some people and there can be inhibitions. let's talk statistics for a moment. Statistically, 50% of females have been sexually assaulted, sexually abused, molested, raped, along those lines.
Yeah.
1 in 3 to 1 in 4 boys.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's statistically. Now the reality is it's probably more like 80 to 90% plus for females, and I'd say more like 50 to 70% for boys.
Yeah.
Now, I work with groups, I work with females, I work with males. It's staggering how many men have been sexually assaulted.
Yeah, and they're not talking about it.
They're not talking. Yeah. So the statistics are just the ones where people are speaking, and it's the same for females as well. And it doesn't really take into account cultures around the world where that's also a normative practice.
Right.
Another conversation for another time.
Yeah.
The point is that it can be a very sensitive, traumatic place for people, yet we're expected to be sexual in relationship as an unconscious expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say approach sexuality with sensitivity and care.
Yeah.
Number one, really, really important. Number two, have a dialogue about that. Have a dialogue about expressing your sexual needs, maybe your desires, your fantasies. Normalize the discussion of sex in your relationship. That's really helpful too. And so when we do that, we give ourselves an opportunity to make a commitment to be non-judgmental as well and be free in our expression and understand that it's coming from a place of that's the person's preferences, needs, conditioning, whatever it may be, And so we don't want to stigmatize sexuality. So talk about sex in your relationship. Figure out what works for you. Are you the type of person that has to have sex 15 times a day? Or are you really deeply satisfied with sexual union, intimacy, and connection maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks or maybe 2 times a week? And where's your partner meet you then? How can you meet each other then? What healthy boundaries and understanding can you put with each other on that? It's really important.
Yeah.
And so you may have a partner that wants to have sex 2 times a day, and you only really... and it's not necessarily a wounding. It's just that you're okay and happy having sex and being sexually intimate with someone, your partner, a couple of times a week.
Mm-hmm.
How do you reconcile that? That's an individual decision. Maybe it's okay. I hear you. You need to masturbate. Okay, I'm okay with that. I hear you that you need that. But there's honesty here. It's okay. Maybe we open the relationship up and you can see other partners. Whatever it may be, whatever the conversation is, it's about having very real conversations that, again, are super confronting, super triggering for most of us.
Yeah.
They present am I going to be rejected? Am I going to be abandoned if I speak my truth? Am I going to be humiliated? Am I going to be laughed at? Am I going to be judged? So we have to create a safe space for each other and ourselves to do that. So you've got to do your inner work. It comes back down to doing your inner work where you can have that conversation.
And not making assumptions about, because
Yes.
I think sometimes that happens, right? You get into a relationship, you have sex right away, or not right away, but like you have sex and you don't have that discussion. And then you just make a lot of assumptions about what your sex life is going to be without ever having a conversation. Yeah.
Yep, because we project onto others. So when we usually get angry at people, it's because they're not responding in a way that we would.
Right. Yeah, that's so true.
And so when we make assumptions, we just think, I want sex every day. They must want sex every day. Or I'm really sexually liberated and up for new things, and they must be like that too.
Right.
No, not necessarily. And so what underpins that sometimes is not trauma and pain and fear, or really harmful, hurtful experiences, but sometimes it is. Mm-hmm. And we have to be sensitive to that. And honestly, most of the time it is. When we look at the statistics, formal and informal, most of the time it is. You know that you're in a group of people that, you say you're in a large group of women, chances are minimum 50% of those women have been sexually abused.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's fucking staggering.
I know, it is.
And the truth is it's a lot more than that.
I'm really glad that you said that, because I think the rampancy of sexual abuse and sexual trauma through the entirety of our lives, especially women, unfortunately, and men too, I guess I shouldn't say that. I mean, we both can experience it, but that there is a lot of shame around that. And if you come into a relationship and you want to feel healthy and sexually express yourself, but that's lingering in the background and you don't have a partner who you can talk to them about that and say, like, I need to go slow, or like this thing triggers me or whatever, it's hard to connect sexually
Yeah.
with your partner in that way. So I think it's a really valid point that you brought up, that we could be carrying that around, and that just because your partner, male or female or any gender, is not always willing to engage sexually, doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with the relationship or anything wrong with your intimacy. It might be something even heavier that needs to be addressed collectively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that you said that. So it's about an hour. Of course, you said all the things my heart needs to hear. So thank you for that. I wondered if you had any other general relationship advice that you'd like to cascade to the listeners that might help them along on their journey.
Yeah, just be willing. I really just come back to willingness. It's so much of everything that we are in a relationship. But you have to be willing to celebrate your wins. You have to be willing to acknowledge your partner and yourself in all their glory and all their triumph. And you have to be willing to sort of really drudge through the mud with them. That's willingness is everything.
Yeah, I love that. Being open and curious and willing. Yeah, I agree. I think there's also, when we get kicked down in relationships, if a relationship hasn't worked out, it's hard to get back up and get back out there, I think. And, being willing, I think, like you said, is key. Where can everyone find you on social media?
Stefanos Safandos on Instagram and Stefanos Safandos on Facebook, all the things, LinkedIn, all the other social media, YouTube, and my website, stefanosafandos.com.
Okay. And I do like to, as you know, end the interview in gratitude. So what 3 things are you grateful in this moment for?
Oh, definitely this conversation. It's a really, really beautiful conversation on many levels. And I'm grateful for my health right now as well. I'm really grateful for my health.
That was 2 things.
Was that 2? Did you say 2 or 3?
3.
3 things. 3. Sorry, I think you said 2. My apologies.
Okay.
And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my intimate relationship and my relationship with my wife, and how we see each other and show up to each other, and even the difficult parts of that. Because there are difficult parts, there really are, and I'm really grateful for how we show up to those difficult parts, or even when it's immature, even when it's coming from wounding, because so thus far history has shown that we continue to come back to, okay, how can we grow from this? And I'm really grateful for that.
I love that. I think that's a great way to end it. This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Xiomara. Co-produced and mixed by Billy Lee Myers Jr. Music created and curated by Mr. Pixie. Podcast artwork by Rebecca Rodella. You can find I'm Awake Now What podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, download, rate, and review. Come back every Sunday to take part in a new and enlightening conversation. May you be filled with love and light until we meet again.